And welcome back, everyone. We're going to be doing the walkthrough of the Texas Hold'em in JavaScript. The initial beginning of the functionality, we are determining what our cards are, which was brought in from the other blackjack and stored in local storage. Then we start giving hierarchies of what the hands are highest to lowest to highest, and the card hierarchy. And we also want to get we're going to be counting the suits, so ultimately we need to get an array ready for that. Player details is all the DOM elements that we'll be updating for each player IDs and hierarchies. These objects here are all going to be the player hands, and the results and compare and active players. These are all information regarding who's got that best hand and who's still playing. So once again, we're going to bring in the player money concept is something that set player money is being shared throughout all the games. So this is how we pass it around through using local storage, and we also use the parameters in the URL. So we pass them from game to game here. The monetary value is going to be the bets we're going to be placing. And so let's go ahead and get into our Wiki environment and start explaining all of our functionality. And what I'm going to be doing is dividing this up into all the functions, which there's only a few, to get this game running. And then that's how I'll be dicing up this conversation and documenting it, is by its functions independently. So as I said earlier, the initial part of the functionality is we need to get an understanding to the program of what is the highest cards, what is the highest hand, and it's all going to be based on the index of that array. We see from royal flush, straight flush, and so on and so forth. The computer is going to see the index numbers, and that will evaluate how it knows what's the best. And here we'll be storing these. As you can see, I'm going to go ahead and explain a little further into the objects. They're going to be storing, and then since this is just Hold'em, they're only going to be storing 2 cards. And that's going to be suit and value. The keys and values of suit and value will be stored there. Now, the community cards will be shared throughout. That's why these objects are going to be rather small. Okay, let's go ahead and see what I'm going to type here. The variables will be storing in the player's best hands. Yeah, so let's go ahead and define everything so you kind of understand what's going on. I mean, you can always come back in and take a look at what I've written here. If I didn't explain it correctly, hopefully the documentation here in the Wiki environment will be a little more helpful. This is an ongoing project, so earlier today I made some changes, and chances are sometime later on this week I'll make even more changes. So if you come around and see a mistake, don't be surprised if it's fixed within a day or two. Because this is like everything I do, this is an ongoing project. I never really stop anything. I'm always refactoring stuff. And okay, so active players. Now the active players counts for everybody playing, and as they fold out, we take this array and remove them. So then we're not comparing them anymore. They've folded. The compare cards is going to be showing the highest cards, and the results will be showing what the best hands are. So within these indexes, we're going to be assigning the 0, 1, 2, or 3 to have the value of the best hand, the best card, and then we'll also be determining who's playing with the active player array. And so I'm also going to be recording who's got the highest cards. I need to know what cards were involved so that we can have a little explanation when these hands are laid out. And the highest cards, a lot of times, let's say that the players have the same hand, they both have a pair, or they both have 3 of a kind. These highest cards now will determine who wins that hand, because since when they negated who had the best hand, we got to go for highest card. Okay, so top hand is going to be the user that got the 1. The player is that's just the font awesome icon, and the details you can see here. I'm more assigning the messages, and my details are going to be kind of something based on a variable, so I don't have to write out the document and get element by all the time. Okay, so let's do a little more description about our next function, which is generate. And generate is going to be used anytime we want to bring out a new card. And we're going to get that card, that generate number is going to be from the actual amount of cards we have. And then we'll see, well, has this already been used? And if so, then we won't use it, and we'll move forward. So we never have the same card twice within each hand. Yeah, so generate will be called, it's going to be out here because it's called by deal, and it's also called by match. So we need to leave it outside so the scope can take care of it. It can be reached by both functions. Now, get occurrence is something we use quite a bit because if somebody, like I said, has the same hand or the same cards, we need to start evaluating how many times this card came up or how many times this hand came up. And if it's get occurrence gets utilized quite a bit when we're evaluating hands because this is a really common thing. So I left it outside by itself. It's not nested in any function because I need to know about it in multiple places. So that's why it's out. Clear is really something that gets utilized once the game's up and we need to reset the DOM elements. It's something so we can play again. The details and like what the cards had before all need to be kind of clicked back. So yeah, that's basically saying what I just said here. Okay, so fold is also something that we're going to be... Fold actually does clear as well. It just kind of sets the user up saying, okay, I'm out of this game. What did I just lose? And let's go ahead and get the DOM elements ready to play again after my loss. And you win is going to be called anytime I've won. And obviously, if the type is defaulted as a default, then if type equals default, then we're all good. It's just a win. If it type equals split, then that means that I'm going to get half of the money, and I won with someone else. And then once again, we are set player money, and then return false is used here just to kind of stop the JavaScript from doing anything else. I don't even really think it's necessary sometimes, but I do that because I don't want to have like memory loss. So if I'm afraid for some reason the JavaScript doesn't really know where to go from somewhere, I just hit return false. I mean, I want it to stop anyway, so. Yeah, here it's explaining that information. So once again, now we're going to go into you lose, which is very similar to the same you win. We're just going to be subtracting money from the player's balance. And then we'll reset the the DOM elements so they can play again. And remember, throughout the game, top hand represents the player's identity. So they get generated through the evaluation hand. They're called iterations. Now, the winning iteration, meaning the winning player, is top hand. So I would be player 0. So if top hand is 0, that means I won. And within the game, and as we will go through the evaluations, I'm actually iteration 0. So remove player gets used a couple times. This happens when they fold. They get taken out of the game. And once again, this is out in the kind of floating on its own. It's not nested in any functionality because I need to call it from different places. So once again, it's got a large scope. Now, determining once it takes these people out, if there's only the active players has been removed all the way down to 0, that just means I won. But if there's one active player has a length more than 1, that means at least there's one more. There's at least 2 players. So whatever the length is tells you how many players are left. Okay, so evaluate hand, by far the biggest function in this whole application. There's going to be determining it evaluates all the hands based on the step of the game a little differently. So we run through each iteration, meaning each player gets to run through evaluate hand, and we basically kind of figure out what they have, and then we start comparing. It's a large, so you hear I've highlighted the whole thing to show you how big this function really is. And let's write a little description. And as you can see here, there are game hierarchies. We have, each one of them is like, we have game steps. Now game steps are going to be, it's pre-flop, flop, turn, and river. So pre-flop is game step 1, the flop is game step 2, turn is game step 3, and the river is game step 4. And then from there we evaluate who won. Okay, so within game step 1, we are just using the player's cards, which is only 2 of them. So we've broken them down, and so the player's hands is 0 and player hand iteration is 1. So they have, as you can see here, it's only evaluating the 2 hands. There are no community cards just yet. And then when we get into game step 2, we will get into the flop, and then the community cards will be added to the cards array. And then we will be evaluating the 5 cards each player has, being that they're sharing 3 community cards. And there we go. And as you can see here, how the game step 4, your cards array is 7 cards. And so it just keeps getting larger based on the game step. This is how we're going to be breaking down the hand hierarchies. So we've been ticking away and adding up each hand. So start out at 0 for all these variables and get them to defaults of false. And then as we go through the player hands, we can uptick and add to, or declare that this person has a certain hand at one point or another by recording it here. And so then these numbers will be evaluated within an array later on to figure out what everybody has. And let's go ahead and write a descriptive paragraph about that. Yeah, so when you're looking for a straight, we need to represent ace as a 1, basically. So in this case, it'll be represented as a -1 because the next card up will be 0, and that is actually a 2. Okay, so now you can see here that we're calling out things if they have the same suits. So obviously a flush will be determined if that comes up. That would change the best hand index to 5 if they did get a flush, because as we know earlier, the hand hierarchy determines who's going to win, and 5 is a flush. And we can go all the way up to, I think 12 was what it was or something. I can't remember the best hand, how many of them there are. I'd have to go look again, but the best one's like a royal flush. And that would be the highest number on the card index, or the hand hierarchy. And based on the evaluations, we're going to be determining what this... this is where they would determine where they have a straight. I've redone this now. The while loop is not in here anymore. I've broken it down to determine if the user has a pair, or cards that are incremented to, if they, let's say I have a 2 and a 3, or a 2, 3, and a 4, or something, increments, it will tell me. And so that will tell the computer whether they should fold or not, based on they may or may not have a straight coming up. Like they won't fold if they have, incrementing card numbers. So that'll keep them in the game. And go see the updates I've done. You will see that it's a lot simpler now. and it works more efficiently. Yeah, so as you can see here, we can determine who has what based on the index of the card hierarchy. So if they just have if game step equals 1, there we go, compare cards iteration. I'm just reading through this here real quick. So this is going to tell them what hands they have. So if they've got the pair, it's going to uptick a pair. If it has three of a kind, then it's going to add that and say this is your card index now. Your hand index is going to tell you how well you did. And so if something trumps it, like you had a pair and then you come around with three of a kind, that pair, that hand index that said that you had a pair, is now going to be updated to the next whatever three of a kind index is, and so on and so forth, all the way to royal flush. So they always just record your best hand, and if it's you finally run across something that's not better, then they don't update it. And as you can see, we keep doing this all the way to 9. So that would be the royal flush. 9 is the highest hand index. And so we go ahead and we find out, hey, did this person have just a high card? If it equaled a high card, we just need to put that message down and tell them what the high card was. Now, as you can see a little bit further down, just same thing. I'm just going to write it out. Now, iteration equals 0, that means me. So if iteration 0, they're going to go ahead and tell me what I have. And this is going to tell you in game step 4. So it waits until the end of the game at this point to update. Okay, this is where they cannot have 3 pair. So if they have 3 pair, I need to bring that down to the lowest of the 3 pair needs to be negated down to -2, because I can't use it. It'll mess things up. So just keep their top 2 pair. You can't have 3 pair and a 5 card hand. Now, if there's 2 occurrences of the winning hand, we're going to have to go through an evaluation. So what I do is I go through all the players, and if they don't have that winning hand, I'm going to change their compare card to -1, because at this point, since there's 2 winners, we need to find out who has the best hand from there, like the highest card and whatnot. So I can't use the other people's high cards, just the people who won, and then that will determine who has won here. And coincidentally, they both have the same hand. They're supposed to have a split, but it hasn't been working, so I'm probably going to come through and figure out why. Like I said, nothing's ever finished. Now, these are all the evaluations to see if the computer players want to stay in. And it's pretty straightforward. Now, it's just basically saying, step played, I just don't want them to play this thing twice. Sometimes JavaScript just goes and there's a mistake and it runs the function twice, and I can't let it do that. So step played equals false. And then we start doing our conditions. Now, it also only plays players that are in the hand still. So here it's saying if they've got a pair, And this is for game step 2. If they got 2 connected, like an ace and a 2, or a 3 and a 4. If they have a high card, that's also helpful. If they're suited, or if they have an ace, that also is one of them. They will keep playing if they will not fold if they have any of those conditions. And this is for game step 1, which is when the players only have 2 cards anyway. And then here I just go through and find out, like, did anybody bet? Because if so, anybody who checked needs to fold. And that's what happens here. I just run through and check to see if anybody's betted, and then I reset and kick anybody out and fold them if they only checked. There, that explains it. Yeah, so the further we go into the game step, those conditions change. So they would probably want to have 3 or 4 in a row conditions to keep in for that straight if they had gotten to the flop. Like 2 connected doesn't really give you a good chance of getting that straight, but within game step 2 and 3, it definitely does make a difference. So I start seeing, hey, is there 3 connected? Do they have a high card count? Do they have anything suited? So things, I'm looking for a flush, I'm looking for a straight, I'm looking for pairs, everything. But they can't just have a high card at this point or they'll fold. And I'll just write down these conditions. That one literally, to me, it says this person is only going to play if they have an ace. That's what that looks like to me, but I could be wrong. So I think what I do here is write a note to myself, and I'll check it later. Because that's not how they've been playing. They've been betting. If they don't have an ace, they'll still bet. So I think I'm reading this part wrong. Sometimes I just kind of have to go through things with like a fine-tooth comb to see what I was doing, and it might just not be I might not be reading this right. Yeah, so this is where I'm basically double checking my work, and like they're not responding like that, so they'll play even though they don't have an ace. So let me see here. I don't know why it should probably be or. I guess this is just a good look at me rechecking my work. Now, if they have connected 3 or a high card count or 4, first round is suited true, those are all reasons to stay in and bet. And so that's what they do. And I'll just put a note for myself so I can come back later. No, I might be wrong. I might be missing something here. So I guess time will tell when I go look and you see this thing's been updated. Eventually, that'll give you the answer of what I found. And here are the conditions for them to game step 2. Okay, so here we're going into game step 3, and these are conditions on whether they're going to play or not. Okay, so once the conditions are right, if the player bets, anybody who was checking will be folded, and just like the other steps. And then with game step 4, we've gotten to the end of the hand, so if I won, then I'll just fire off I won, because top hand equals 0. And if it's not, then I lost. So then we'll fire off you lose. Pretty straightforward. Yeah, and so here, even if somebody folded at the end of the game, I want to see what everybody had, even if they folded. So I print that out based on their object, their player object up at the top, which just stores their first 2 cards that they received in game step 1. Okay, so now this is the anything but except for game step 1, which would be the function deal. Match actually would be running game step 2, 3, and 4 all the way through the rest of the game. And as you can see, match is going to go ahead and do some incrementing based on the step. Will depend on how much money we're betting on, and we'll update the DOM elements accordingly. And also, based on what's going on, we shall be basically disabling stuff so we can't have the user click buttons while it's doing the process. And we bring it up to the top. Every time we hit match, the user is brought up to the very top of the page with window.location. So here's telling you what's going on with match. Initially, we increment our game step, and that will tell us once we get to evaluate hand which part of the evaluate hand function we'll be utilizing. And here's the way we determine the monetary value based on the game steps. Okay, so now that we've done all that, we also need to update, even if they are checking, we need to update the match buttons so that it stays in tune with the rest of the players. And that's why the else is there. So even if they checked, I still need to up the game step for the monetary value. Okay, so now if it's game step 2, I need to lay out more cards, and by doing that, I can only select from the active cards if they don't already, as long as they don't exist in the use cards array. So I go find, I generate a number from the active cards, and as long as that number is not represented in the use cards array, I go ahead and utilize it. And I do that until I actually reach 3 community cards for game step 2. And as you can see here, I'm just typing up what I just said. And then from there, we'll be evaluating all the active players again at the end of match. There's where the community card array or object is put together. Along with the HTML is printed out of the community cards. And here I'm going through active players, and I'm running evaluate hand function only for the players that's still in the game. And I also pass the game step too. Just it's useful throughout the entire process to know where you are within the game process. Okay, so our next looks like our next function is going to be deal, which is the very last part of this. This is the last function we'll be writing about. And as you can see, deal is like the beginning of the game, so everything gets reset to its default at the beginning of deal. You got your community cards got reset to nothing. Everything results list, everything's back down zeroed out. So we can start fresh. And we use the clear function here to reset the DOM elements up top, so I don't have to write it multiple times. We just really easy just to say clear. We start building the player objects and then assigning those keys and values to their objects. And we also get prepared to write out the HTML for my hand. Now the generate player is, it's interesting because this one actually is I think one of the only nested functions within this whole game, because it has a small scope. It only needs to be fired off when we're generating a new user. And there's 4 of us, including me, so I just go through a for loop and generate players. And there we go. Now the generate player does his job right here by starting our game off with the first 2 player cards. And these are the evaluate hand is only firing off the people who are still in the game, because they're the only ones who you really matter throughout. Like you can't, if you folded, you can't win. So, and that's pretty much the gist of how this thing works. Not nearly as complicated as you thought it would be. It's really more or less like just assigning the hierarchy of hands and cards, and basically telling the computer which ones are the best based on their indexes, and then it's really just evaluating from there. Now this is just my walkthrough of how I've I passed the balance and the theme to Texas Hold'em to poker, and poker back to Texas Hold'em through these buttons. Now as you want to go through and look at the index, we'll go ahead and look at the there's the font awesome. These are my style sheets I'm going to be utilizing. Obviously, there's Google Analytics. Now, don't really worry about this. I was going to set it to where we had different kind of players, but that's not important. These are just our message boards for each player to see. There's my buttons. There's a player's row, so player 0, data player 0 is me, and then so on and so forth. And then this is where the magic happens on the DOM elements, is where I apply the information based on the roles in the game and how they're doing. And obviously there's just a little more index to get the navigation correct, and then the footer is shared along with the alert role, global alert, throughout all the games. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for your time.